Joining me now is the Director General of the National Identification Management Commission, Mr. Chris Onyemena. Today we're looking at how having a general or national database can help the government execute better many of its economic policies. Many analysts argue that the federal government will have better luck doing this if it can actually have a good database. Good morning. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Now, I've reading some reports on how the having a good national database can actually impact on the economy, particularly the financial sector. I know the federal government in the last couple of months or even years has been trying to raise more revenue in taxes and the issue of taxation. Looking at some of the other agencies that remit some revenue to the government, they're having issues on that part. And even the financial sector. Just give us your thoughts on how you think having a national database can actually impact positively on any of the sectors.
Thank you. Actually, what we lack is the ability to identify individuals, and that constrains a wide range of activities. Essentially because if you don't know who you are dealing with, you can't go into different kinds of transactions. You can't even borrow money. And also, it becomes quite difficult for the tax managers to be able to identify those who are supposed to pay taxes. And then, we have different kinds of taxes. There are those that are transactional. There are those that, of course, you have the personal income tax, and that there are those that have to do with capital gains. If you do not have the ability to track transactions, if you do not have everybody who is a taxable adult within the tax radar, it will be difficult for you to then get them to pay tax or to properly and appropriately evaluate their tax liability. So to that extent, the ability of government to provide a unique national identity database would be very instrumental and central to resolving these issues. And it is indeed a welcome development that as I speak, the infrastructure is in place. And what we have just started doing now is to generate what we call the national identification number. We have started from the head office, and so what we are looking to do is to then roll out to the various states. And once we do that, it will then become the next focus to integrate and harmonize the what you call the tax identification number with the national identification number. So the small sample or population of those taxpayers can readily at any point in time be identified or determined by reference to the national identification.
Chris, I'm curious here. For a government agency still talking on taxes, like the Federal Inland Revenue Service, how have they been? What kind of database or mechanisms have they been using to capture all those people they've been able to capture in terms of remittances of taxes? What systems have they been using?
In the past, it wasn't automated. In the past, it wasn't based on what we would call the modern systems of tax administration and management. But in the recent past, in the past 6 to 8 years, what has happened in the tax system is that there's been a whole set of reforms that, in fact, has brought all of our tax administration almost at par with what happens in the modern in the countries of Europe and America. And what that has done is to provide us with the kind of infrastructure that can leverage on what we are doing to make sure that at any point in time, anybody who is a taxable adult or any transaction that is taxable can be identified, can be determined. And so tax avoidance and people not wanting to pay appropriate tax will become something that you can manage properly. In Europe and America, even if you escape or you refuse to pay a VAT tax that is as small as £100, you can easily be embarrassed whether you are a member of Parliament or you're in Congress.
Oh, you mean
but such things don't happen here. But now, with what we have and what we are rolling out, okay, it's a matter of time. Those things will now happen because it will be possible for us to look at the taxable adults, and you can uniquely identify them, and you can uniquely also identify and scrutinize their tax account, because it's a unique tax identification number, and the individual can be uniquely identified. So it's all technology. It's all technology driven, and it's all about unique management of the identity of the individual. Before now, we didn't have such things. So I'm saying that what government has done is to focus on this, if you like, ground norm, the basis for determining who is who. If you know who you are dealing with, then you can determine at what age, what he is doing, what transactions is involved in. Everything is on the table. There won't be ghost identities anymore. There won't be duplicate identities anymore. These are ways by which individuals, corporations evade tax and refuse to pay the correct tax.
Okay, Chris, let's paint a scenario here. I'm a working adult. I've been earning paychecks for several years now, and I haven't been paying taxes. And I'm listening to this interview, and I'm being told that very soon I'm going to have to be captured, in this database, and I'll be made to pay taxes. Well, wouldn't it be based on those who are willing to come forward to participate in this this particular scheme? How much success? How easy is it going to be?
The way it works is that for every right there's an obligation. If you're a citizen and you expect certain services, and there are things you expect from government, and so you do your part, government does its own part. And I'm saying that if you are not a taxpayer, or you have not been paying the correct tax, soon it will become history. Why? Because there is a system, technology driven, that will enable us identify you, relate all that you do to taxes and taxes that you are supposed to pay, and if you have not paid, it will be easy to say to you, this is a tax that you ought to pay and you have not paid. Now it's done at the level of, for instance, your company in this institution. It's managed by your company and you, and the returns get back to the system. There's no way of making any further checks. If there are transactions, for instance, that you are involved in outside of your personal income tax that you pay, there's no way of determining whether you actually have been paying these taxes. There are some that clearly go along with the transaction, the value added tax and what have you, but there are others, capital gains tax and so on and so forth. These are a set of taxes that are inherently difficult to manage if you do not have the identities of individuals and transactions clearly traceable to individuals. So in future, and the future I'm talking about is really in a couple of months. In a couple of months, because we've started the rollout, like I said, it will become possible for you to say, in this country, a population of 167 million people, there are 110 taxable adults in different strata, and you can then begin to say, this is what you expect. If they have not paid, you can trace it to them. It all boils down to being able to manage the identity of the individual.
Okay, now let's talk about how this is can also benefit the financial sector, the banking sector. We do know that although they have their own technology that they use, they have the passwords, the personal identification numbers, but can this in any way also benefit the financial sector? I do know that some people till now still use fictitious names, opening several accounts, keeping illegal funds in some banks. How can this impact?
Basically in three ways. First is, and against the backdrop of what typically drives an economy, is credits. Out here, if you got employed, say yesterday in Channels, and you wanted to start your life, you discover that you have to stay somewhere, save, have a lot of savings to be able to rent an apartment, because you have to pay 2 years rent in advance. If you want to buy a car, you have to look for some loan for you to be able to pay. So typically, the national identity management system that has been put in place would facilitate and help deepen the consumer credit system. So you can look forward to being given a credit simply because you are working somewhere, you are known, you are identified. It's possible to say to your institution on a monthly basis, you can make repayments on their behalf. In Europe and America, it's credit that drives the economy. It stimulates demand, it impacts on local production, and therefore gross domestic product, the GDP, grows. And if it grows, economic opportunities are created, employment opportunities are created. So credits would be deepened, consumer and direct. And then secondly, you truly cannot talk of financial inclusion, creating greater participation in the banking sector and the financial services sector, if you do not have a unique national identity management system. And that's why we refer to what we are doing as a game changer, because you enroll once and you get identified for life. The national identification number that you are given is what will then be used to trace all your transaction and involvement in the economy. The informal sector gets indirectly and compellingly brought into the system, to the financial sector. So the national currency management issues will become a lot more easy to address. And of course, because financial inclusion is at the core, it's at the base, it means that everything that you have to do, anything that you want to do that has to do with payments, that has to do with extending social benefits and what have you to the rural poor, it becomes possible. And once there's financial inclusion, there's typically everything. It becomes possible for you to reach the poor. It becomes possible for you to do social welfare programs. It becomes possible for you to do socio-economic planning at the level that enables you to reach those who are in the nooks and crannies of this country, in the creeks and even in the near desert areas of the north. So it's a transformational project. Indeed, very transformational.
Now, like you just said, obviously there's so many good benefits attached to this program. And let me also mention here that it's not new to Nigeria. We've done it before, but we didn't exactly get it right then. What's the assurance?
Well,
are we going to get it right this time? How are we going to get now? We have a larger population, 167 million, many more of the population in the rural areas than in the urban. So,
you know, in the recent times, the past 20-25 years of Nigerian's existence, we've had the problem of rural-urban migration. And typically the agricultural sector, even though it's the driver, is still having fewer hands in the modern sense of it. However, I think one way we can address the issue of rural-urban migration is if we get it right at the level of the national identity management system. And what I can tell you for sure, with certainty, is that this time around we have gotten it right. And I'll tell you why we had problems in the past. We had problems in the past because there is a deliberate focus on issuing identity cards. And this is based on the mistaken belief that if you have an identity card, then you can be identified. Anyone can take your staff identity card and go to any business center and develop one in your name, but in their own picture, headshot. And they can cash a check that belongs to you, because the person that is attending to them would simply look at the card and at their face and agrees it with what he has seen. And at best makes a photocopy and says, I have verified the identity of this individual. But that's wrong. Because before you can verify or confirm or authenticate the identity of the individual, you need to go back to the database that holds the records that you find on that card. If you have not done that, you truly have not verified the identity. And so what we are providing now, first and foremost, is the National Identification Number, which we call the NIN.
So then we need to carry cards. You're saying
we say your number. We say your number is your identity.
Okay.
Okay. Then subsequently, you have a smart card. The smart card has a chip. On the chip is your identity database, in a limited manner, so that there can always be reference to the records in the database, either online or offline. And we are trying to make sure that this can be sustained. You can regularly update it, and access is made available to institutions in a manner that enables identities to be confirmed for transactional purposes. And once that is done, I bet you it's a transformational project. It can impact all facets of the economy.
Now, Chris, we're almost out of time. We need to wrap this up. But those who are holding the former national identity cards, what will happen to those ones?
Well, if you have the old one, you will continue to use it until the system eventually over time, and we expect that over the next 30 months. Indeed, by December 2013, we expect we would have phased that completely, all existing cards that were issued under the previous scheme, because we no longer issue those cards for sure. Those are plastic 2D barcode cards. What we are planning to start issuing in another 2 months is the smart card.